My name's Rochelle Imey, and this presentation is about growing participation in sport, and I'm going to describe Sport and Recreation Spatial, which is a program of research that develops knowledge and translates that knowledge to the sports sector and government agencies to try and increase their capacity to make evidence-based decisions that relate to sport and health program policy developments. If you're involved with a sporting organisation and you saw this graph of your participation numbers of your sport over the last 4 years, of total numbers of participants, you'd probably be quite happy. But my question is, do you actually need to know more than the total numbers in a given sport? This is the same participation numbers of a sport, but analysed as a participation rate, that is, the number of participants per the population. And as we can see here, the participation rate in this given sport has actually decreased. So what this tells us is that it's important when you're trying to understand participation in sport to understand more than just the total numbers and even more than just the total rate as well, because this graph here clearly shows that participation in sport is very different across different age. It's very dominant amongst the earlier years. There's also other determinants of participation in sport that relate to gender, geographical region. So it's important when we're trying to understand sport participation levels and the determinants to understand more than just the total number. Now, participation in sport in Australia, we do not have a good understanding of participation. There is data available, but it generally sits in silos within individual organisations, and there's not some sector-level understanding or capture of information and understanding of participation. So a potential solution is to try and access the sports data that already exists and to integrate that data and analyse that to produce knowledge to inform program and policy development across the sector. So that's where Sport and Recreation Spatial comes in. It uses innovative latest technologies, geographical information system that maps data relating to sport and health. So we collect data, we integrate it, we analyse it, and we visualise it through the GIS, as well as analysing it through more traditional research methods to provide that information across organisations in the sports sector for their evidence-based decision making. Now, if you want to grow participation in sport, you need to know not just about participants, but you need to try and understand about the population and facilities as well. You can't just look at one of these aspects in isolation. How can you analyse where facilities need to go unless you understand about participation in the population of a given region? How can you increase participation and have strategies for that if you don't understand the population of a given region as well? So on the right hand side, if you're wanting to increase participation and or facilities and or health is your main outcome, you really need to understand all three corners of that triangle and how they relate to each other. So the key areas of Sport and Recreation Spatial is to understand the participation levels and trends and how this differs across time, across age, across gender and geographical region. What are the influences or determinants of participation? We're also very interested in what are the specific health benefits of participation in sport. And last but not least, the nexus between the facilities, participation and population is one of our key areas. We have a range of data sources, and this is increasing as the research involves. We have 10 years of the ERAS, the Exercise, Recreation and Sport Survey, and this provides really good data on overall leisure time physical activity. We're also working with a number of sports, including AFL, tennis, netball, basketball, cricket, hockey and lawn bowls, and integrating their participation data as it relates to their players, coaches and officials for up to the last 5 years. And for these sports alone in Victoria, we have already over 2.6 million participant records, so great scope of data. We're also very lucky to have access to these facility data of sport and recreation facilities across Victoria provided to us from Sport and Recreation Victoria. We also then integrate and analyse this data and how it relates to population demographics, to census data. And also what's really important when we're trying to plan for the future is not just the population now, but how's the population going to change in the future, so we overlay population projection data and analyse that as well. We have a range of health indicators that we're analysing, including overweight and obesity, psychological distress, diabetes, childhood development vulnerability, as well as different measures of physical activity. we have what I say is two arms to the outputs. One is the GIS, so an individual sport, let's say netball, can go onto the website, can access their data as it relates to their player, coaches, officials, as well as their facilities, and see the interactions and how that relates to the population demographics and geographically as well. And this helps them to inform their own strategic and program developments. We also have more of a traditional research arm where we conduct individual research summaries for sports, as well as integrating all of the sports data for more sector level research summaries. The research that we've been conducting to date is to try and understand what are the participation trends over time, and how does this relate to different genders, the geographical regions, also what are the different age profiles, so where are the main participants in sport, and where are those gaps that we can try and then work to facilitate growth in. What is the provision of facilities across the state for a given sport and for sport in general? And what we can then do is, through this analysis with the participation data, we can actually say you need X amount of ovals per 1,000 head of population to have medium or high participation. And this really helps the sports and the local governments to try and plan for their facility development. Other research we're conducting relates to retention and dropout. So what are the ages or genders of participants that are either playing continuously in a given sport or that perhaps are dropping out? Other research relates to transitions. So the transition from modified sports programs such as Auskick or FunNet or Hotshots, as what are the factors that are contributing to transition from those modified sports programs into competitive club structure, and does that relate to age and gender? And last but not least, trying to understand different associations of sport and different health outcomes. So how does sport contribute to health? The technology is that we have a range of different indicators on the left-hand side there, and it's a dynamic system in that if you select, say, netball in 2013, a particular age group, and let's say we want to try and understand male participants, if you select those options, the map, which I'll show some examples in a minute, will actually be a dynamic map, so it'll occur on the fly and be able to give you an understanding of that. We have a dedicated website that has information about the research we're conducting, our partners, and you can access the maps through this website as well. So I'm going to give you a few examples of some screenshots of the GIS. So this example here is participation in netball for a given postcode, and the darker blue represents higher numbers of participants in netball than the white ones. And this clearly shows that we need to know more than just a total number per year, or even a total number per state, or even just a participation rate, because we can see here clearly that sport participation varies quite considerably across different geographical regions, and then we can try and understand reasons why. Does that relate to the population, perhaps to coaches, officials, perhaps to facilities, or even program and strategic developments in given areas? We have different participation filters, so at any time you can select maybe participants, or if you're interested in coaches and where are the level 3 coaches or umpires, and you can select different age groups, gender, or even want to analyse a particular club. At any time you can click on a map and it'll give you the actual breakdown and a benchmark of that region compared to other regions. So this, for example, is an LGA of Brimbank, and it tells you the total number of netballers in that region, a participation rate, number of coaches and umpires, and it'll give you an average across all the LGAs in the state, and you could normally scroll down on the website and see where this LGA is benchmarked across the others in terms of numbers of participants. As I said earlier, the numbers is one thing, but sometimes it's more important or more valuable to actually understand the participation rate, because you actually might have more netballers in one LGA than another, but it actually might be a smaller participation rate if there's a smaller number of people living in that area. So by integrating the population demographic data, we can then help the sport to understand the participation rate per the population. And this time we've shown this by LGAs, so this is the number of people within the population that are playing netball as a percentage. We can also analyse changes in participation across time. So this is only a 1-year snapshot, but you could look up to 5 years, and what this is showing that just within 1 year there are considerable changes of participation within a given area, and then we can try and understand why that is occurring. Why is there being increased in some areas and not in others? at any time. So you can export the data, so the map should be able to show an overall visual of what's going on, but you can always click on that and export that data for further analysis. Apart from the GIS, we're also doing some other research summaries, and this is an example of trends in participation over time and across the lifespan as well. And our data has all participants in that sport from age of 4 to 100, and we clearly see here that sport participation is dominated between those aged 10 to 14, but then there's a considerable drop off during the later adolescence. But a positive over time is that for many of these age groups, the participation as a rate has actually increased over the last couple of years. Other work we're doing is looking at retention. So this is just for people aged 4 to 14, and this demonstrates those that are participating continuously for 3 years, or discontinuous, that is, that might have played for 1 year, dropped off and come back, or for those that only participated in one single year. And we can clearly see here that if people are participating between the ages 7 and 9, they're more likely to be playing this sport for 3 years. However, getting them in much younger, they're not going to be playing for those 3 years. That may relate to their youngness, that they are very young, and it also may relate to sampling. That is, that children participate in one sport and then go and sample another. Health, we have a range of health indicators that we're trying to look at the associations between participation in sport and health, and this is just one overlay of obesity. So this shows the LGA areas where the population is considered obese compared to those that are not obese. Also got some work working on sports injuries, and this shows the cluster of injuries across the state and a heat map of those injuries. And what we're going to do is look at the association between those injuries and different factors such as age and gender, but also participation rates. So is the number of sports injuries related to the number of people playing in a particular area? Facilities, these red dots are all the netball facilities across the state, and we also provide some details of the provision of facilities per population as well as per players. So this shows green a high provision of facilities, and yellow medium, and red low, where there's a lower number of facilities per the population, and another analysis is actually per players as well. And this can really help sports and local governments plan for where facilities need to be provided and or upgraded. At any time you can click on any aspect of the map and it'll give you the closest facilities, and it'll give you a breakdown of some details of those facilities, such as the number of courts, what surface, the age and the condition. We also conduct some other reports, and this is just an example relating to facilities reports, and this shows a benchmark of the provision of facilities across all LGAs in Victoria. Population projections are very important to try and understand not just how the population is at the moment, but how's it going to change in the future, and how do we need to plan, particularly for facilities, of where the population shifts are going to be in terms of growth corridors. So here we can see the red dots are the netball facilities, and the shaded colours is where the population is going to grow in the future, or it's actually going to decrease in those orange areas. So if you were looking at facility development and perhaps some of those courts in those orange areas needed upgrading, perhaps you don't need to upgrade all of them, or because the population is going to decrease, and then you need to really zoom in and look at those green areas and look at the provision of facilities that are there, because you're going to have such a high growth of population, and have you got enough facilities to cater for that demand in the future. Well, that's it from me. I'd like to acknowledge our sponsors and partners, and that's a little snapshot of Sport and Recreation Spatial.